I would like to welcome all of you to today's Flash webinar, webinar series, Voices from Within. Today is episode 3 of this series, Conversations on Clinical Trials, CISCRP with Curebase. We are very excited to have you all here. And I will just briefly introduce our moderator and panelists before we get started. We have Jane Myles today, who is Vice President of Clinical Trial Innovation at Curebase. Qiana Alexander, our lupus clinical trial participant, who will be sharing her experience. And Sean Lynch, who is Vice President of Clinical Operations at Curebase. Okay, I will turn it over to Jane to get us started.
Thanks, Lindsay, and welcome to all of you who are joining us today for this fun and short little conversation about clinical trials. The most important thing we can let you know is that we have a guest of honor today, Qiana, because first, she's a medical hero for having been in a clinical trial, and second, very few clinical trial participants get to share their experience with other people who are considering or maybe not at all aware of clinical trials. So thank you for being with us today, Qiana.
Thank you.
So before we dive in, I have a few questions and we're going to let you and Sean both have a go at them. I want to confirm you've been in a clinical trial or maybe more than one, and that was a clinical trial conducted at a research site. Is that correct?
Yes, at a hospital. Yes.
Got it. And I'm just calling that out because while we work a lot with decentralized and hybrid trials, your experience with what I would call a brick and mortar setting.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So lupus trials are always hard. I've done a few as a person who designed trials, not as a participant in them. I'm curious whether or not, as a patient, you got to weigh in with any of your thoughts on the trial design, that is what you would be asked to do in the trial before the trial was finalized, like the whole design parameters.
Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to, weigh in on how I would have liked the trial to be designed for, the different parameters that they were asking for. Everything was set. Matter of fact, they came to me about the trial because of my medical condition. They said, okay, you fit the parameters for this trial that we're doing. We would like you to join. So I didn't even know about the trial until they gave me a call, about this situation. And I was, for my medical condition, and I was about to have surgery. So they wanted me to start the trial before I had surgery so they could see, yes, the before and after, what was happening before I had the surgery. And now that I, had the surgery, what the difference was. So I didn't get any say so in the trial. They just emailed me the information and said, we would like you to join. Are you interested? And pretty much that was my decision, yes or no.
It's so interesting, Qiana. Like, it's almost like a take it or leave it moment for the patient. Even though they found you, it's still like you weren't given much input or even the potential to give any input. But during the trial, as you started engaging with the site staff and the nurse, did you ever have an opportunity to provide feedback on what was happening to you during the trial?
Yes, I did. Because actually, when I brought the clinical trial to my attendant actually told me, did I really want to do this? She said, do you really want to do this? Because they're asking, she thought that they were asking for a lot that they weren't giving, back to me. So that was a question, but there were a few things in the trial that I wanted for my personal knowledge. So I think that was the main reason why, I joined and tried to stick it out through the trial, because there was different things that I was looking for in my body that nobody could, nobody was explaining. So I figured, okay, well, this would be the way for me to, to learn more. But during the trial, the first time I was on site, it was just, it was a lot. I was there pretty much, got there 7 a.m. and got in a cab to go home, maybe about 4 or 5 o'clock.
Wow.
So I did have a conversation with the project coordinator about that. Okay, we need to, figure this out, a little bit more, because all the testing was back to back. The blood test, I had to fast, then I had to find something to eat. You get there confused. You don't know if you're supposed to pay for something to eat, they're supposed to pay for something to eat, where to go, 2
It's a
seconds,
lot.
like I said. Yeah, it's a lot, like I was throwing a bagel in my mouth as I was undressing for like an MRI. So I was like, okay, this, we have to work something out, because this is a little, too much, all
Burden,
at,
I think,
all
is the
at
word
one
I always
time.
use.
Yeah, it was like, okay, one test at, 7:30, fill out all the paperwork. And some of the tests weren't even in the same building. So then,
Right.
so then it was like, okay, trying to get to, the next place, trying to, then you have to wait for the labs, then you have to, try and get something to eat. Then, you don't want to be pushed, to, if your appointment is at 10 o'clock, you don't want to be pushed to, wait for the next person, because then it's gonna, make it even longer.
It's
So
a miracle that anyone makes it through the trial at all, with the burden that trial designers put on patients. I mean, this is something I complain about a lot, is like most people who write protocols tend to be pretty far removed from the impact and the burden it has on the patient. And the feedback you gave, Qiana, like, did they make any changes to your experience during the study because of that feedback?
Yes, they did, which I was
Amazing.
very happy. Yeah, I was very happy about. So they would call me whenever, it was time for the next session, probably about 2 weeks in advance. And one, for the dates. And then they would work with me to, do you want to come in early? Do you want to come in the afternoon? And then, okay, if we do this, then we'll give you some time, a half an hour in between, an hour in between, so that you can rest, so you can eat your food without, throwing it in your, mouth and half eating it and go to the next. So I was happy that they did listen to that. So we scheduled things out a little, further in between, instead of having things back to back.
Incredible.
So we have a question, actually. I'm going to interject just for a moment, so we include this, but one of our listeners is curious, Qiana, if you used a paper consent form, or if you used an electronic consent form, or whether or not that changed throughout the course of the trial, because as you said, it was a longer one.
Yes, we did both. At the beginning, they sent, the email with all of the, all of the information, and you did the, the sign thing, once you agreed. But then when you got to, the hospital, they went over, the consent form with you, once again, do you have any questions, concerns, etc. And then you signed again, in person when you were there. And then as it, well, I guess everybody got a little bit more technology savvy. So then when I started going in for the other sessions, they just passed me the iPad and was like, okay,
Okay.
here's
That's
the,
interesting.
whatever questions that they had for the day. Are you moving? Are you this? Are you moving better? Et cetera, et cetera. Then you could just go through it, on the iPad, and then, that was it. And then they would ask you questions. I guess that happened after about 2 or 3 sessions. So
yeah,
you were kind of, in the groove by then.
Of course.
So it sounds like that was actually patient data capture on the tablet, and maybe also the consent form was available in an electronic format. So that's cool.
Yes.
The trial was changing underneath of you as you went through it, and you got to provide feedback on your own experience and how to make it better. Do you know if that went any further than your individual experience or what your specific site was doing? In other words, did it lead to a protocol change?
From what I know, it did lead to a protocol change because they did let me know that that they were doing the same thing with me that they were doing with the other patients. So they were getting to them earlier and trying to schedule out what time, how to schedule the bone density test, the MRIs, time to get something to eat. So they said that they were doing better with that and trying to have people, schedule it out so it was more convenient for the patient. They did let me know that was
Yeah.
happening.
One
And-
last question, Qiana, I guess, before we run out of time is, if you had the opportunity to participate in another clinical trial, do you think that you know enough from your experiences now to give that feedback up front? And, and I guess, do you think other patients are in a tough spot, I guess, when they don't have prior trial experience? But if you had to do another trial, would you give feedback before signing consent?
Definitely. I
Good.
know, when you do these things, you don't know if you can say something, should you say something,
Should.
like this is gonna take up too much time. I'm not, you're kind of, I should say, you feel like as a patient, you feel like you're kind of at the mercy of whomever is doing the trial, and you don't know, like you have no
Yeah.
idea usually that you can speak up and say, that I don't want to do something. The only reason I ended up speaking up was because I was exhausted,
Right.
I was exhausted, like, okay, I don't know if I can do this, again. But now if I do something again, I'll look at the fine print and be like, oh, okay, like this is going to take a lot. This is not going to take a lot. Is it, is it worth it? Is it, is it not worth it? What are the parameters? So I would definitely do a clinical trial again. And I would definitely, speak up with the fine print.
I'm super glad to hear that, because I think participation in clinical trials is like one of the most noble things that people can do, and really appreciate that you did this and you would continue to do it. And for anyone out there listening, listen to people like Qiana. Their voice is incredibly important to make your trials actually patient friendly. Jane?
This is why we wanted to have this conversation today, because slowly, too slowly, in my opinion, the drug development industry has realized that patient voice is critically important to designing and executing trials successfully. And so we wanted to share Qiana's story as an example of how having gathered that input in the design phase might have made the experience easier for every patient in the trial. So thank you for being in the trial, sticking it out, and most importantly, providing your feedback mid-study so they could shift. But we could do better with help from people like you. So I see some Q&A in the...
Oh, and one last thing, have a phlebotomist on hand. Don't try to have the people in this study take your blood. Have a phlebotomist on hand, because most of the patients are always getting lab work. So they might not be the easiest stick. So just have the phlebotomist on hand so they don't have to go through somebody, the coordinator trying to stick them 300 times before they bring them to the
golly
lab.
gee, yes. We are out of time. One person wanted to know if you did get the data that you were hoping for about your own body as part of the trial.
Yes, I did get the results from the MRIs and the bone density tests. anytime you did them, you got them like the next day and they spoke to you about, you know, the situation. And even for me, they even gave me recommendations, you know, to add an endocrinologist to my team. The blood results that they were taking, they took a lot of blood. I did not get the results for that. I don't know why, but they said that they weren't going to give me the results for the blood.
Well, we'll have to leave it there for now, but Lindsay just confirmed we can answer questions offline through email. And I want to say thank you, Sean and Qiana and CISCRP for hosting this with us today. I hope somebody learned something and actually is giving Qiana that shout out for being a medical hero.
Thank you.
Qiana.